Power, live from Washington, D.C.
Welcome to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington as we come to you with breaking news tonight. It has begun. The Department of Justice releasing the first batch of Jeffrey Epstein documents that include court docs, redacted Freedom of Information requests, call logs, and many photographs before tonight's midnight deadline. This, of course, after Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act last month, setting the stage for tonight with a live view on Bloomberg TV of the Department of Justice right now. As of 5 p.m. Eastern, we have seen what is the first wave of files to drop after Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche hit the airwaves earlier today, setting expectations, telling Fox News, quote, "I expect that we're going to release more documents over the next couple of weeks. So today, several 100,000, and then over the next couple of weeks, I expect several 100,000 more," unquote. Despite the first tranche of files being dropped here, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal is now calling for an audit of the Department of Justice over its inability to release all of the documents by tonight. Let's start our coverage now with Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison, who's had her eyes on the documents. And Laura, I know we've got a couple of teams going through literally hundreds of thousands of pages right now. Are any headlines breaking? Is there any new information here for starters?
For starters, there's no new information. There is no smoking gun. But we are seeing some images, particularly of former President Bill Clinton, that we've seen before in previous images. Michael Jackson is also in one of these. But this is also a huge trove of data. There are things like grocery lists. We're talking payments to vendors. A lot of it is also heavily redacted. There are some pages that are completely redacted, or the names of on bank statements that are also redacted. So it's really hard to piece together exactly what's going on here, at least in these first hours or so. It's also noteworthy that these documents are not searchable. This was part of the law. They were supposed to be searchable to help people go through and find different things. That has not been fulfilled here. And similarly, because this is just the first tranche, we were supposed to get everything today. Other things are coming later in the coming weeks. We'll
dig more into the legalities here with Jessica Roth, the former federal prosecutor, in a moment. But you just pointed out two important things so far in the first 2 minutes of our broadcast. This is not a complete release, and they are not searchable. So the administration has technically broken the law twice today.
Technically. And this is the question really is, what sort of recourse can Democrats, have here to force them to move more quickly here? We have already seen a bunch of Democrats on the Hill saying they're looking at all their legal options to whether to audit the DOJ or to, potentially Jamie Raskin, for example, threatened legal action against the Department of Justice and the administration. So this fight is not over. Today is really just the beginning of what is going to be more documents coming and a broader political fight.
Realizing a lot of this is not enforceable, so they're going to take some more time. And I realize it's a huge project to go through all of these documents and conduct and identify all the opportunities for redactions. But we saw a letter today, Laura, that gives us a little bit of a roadmap as to what we might be learning over the coming days, because we can likely expect headlines to roll throughout the weekend as more and more information emerges here. This, again, the Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, who sent a letter to Congress making it clear that in these documents, more than a dozen politically exposed people and government officials' names appear, and some 1,200 victims have been identified, Laura. These are numbers we haven't heard until now.
Yes, this really gives a sense of kind of the scope of, Epstein's empire here and all the people who were included in this. There was also, some documents that included pages of masseuse names. All of those names are redacted. So this really is, instead of, the whole point that the administration was hoping is that this would appease all the people who were wanting more transparency. This really is only raising more questions about who's involved and the scope of their involvement.
Laura, thank you so much. We'll check back in with you a bit later on. Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison with a busy evening ahead. Joining us now with a look into the legal implications of this release is Jessica Roth, the former federal prosecutor for the Southern District of New York, professor at Cardozo School of Law. Professor, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming back to see us on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is a pile here. It's going to take time, maybe days or even weeks, I suppose, for everyone to go through and confirm what they are reading. What would you begin with as you try to dissect these documents?
Well, it's hard to know where to start exactly. I'd be interested to see how they are categorizing the material as they upload it to the website. Already, Mr. Blanche has signaled in his letter that there is a great deal of information that has not yet been provided. There was something in his letter that also caught my eye in particular. He said that the department was going to be withholding material based on various common law privileges, including work product privileges and deliberative process privileges, in addition to material withheld for the reasons that are identified in the Epstein Act as bases for withholding information. So essentially, it sounds like the department is going to assert as a rationale for withholding some material that it has essentially privilege over those materials. That's not something specified in the Act as a basis for withholding information. That could be a reason for the department to say, we're not going to give you all of the internal memos within the DOJ for why particular individuals were not charged, for example. So that caught my eye in particular.
Okay, sure. We saw in the Blanche letter essentially an executive summary of this first tranche. Right, that protecting victims is of the highest priority for President Trump, the Attorney General, the FBI, and the Department of Justice. As part of the review and production, the department solicited counsel for any victims of Jeffrey Epstein and invited counsel to provide us with names of victims, whether previously identified or not. I talked about redactions, Professor, earlier today with Robert McWhirter, the constitutional criminal law attorney. Here's what he had to say.
There's nothing to evaluate the completeness of the disclosure. People are going to have to look at this with a fine-tooth comb, because I do not trust this administration to give everything. And in fact, there's indications that they want to just dish out things that would make Democrats look bad and pull back things that make Republicans and the president look bad.
Do they have purview over redactions, Professor? Because we're going through a lot of pages right now, and in some cases, they're completely blacked out.
So the act that was passed by Congress gives the Department of Justice the authority to withhold information, to redact for very limited bases, but they do include to protect the privacy interests of their survivors. Importantly, the Act also requires the Department of Justice to provide a justification for all the redactions within 15 days after the completion of release of information required to be disclosed by the Act. So I'm going to be looking to see what the Department of Justice says when it provides that subsequent justification for redactions. One thing that's going to be difficult to pin down now is when is the deadline for providing that justification. The act that was passed by Congress said today is the date for the release of information, and then said 15 days after disclosure of the information required by the act is complete, the department has to provide the justification for all of its redactions. And so the question is, given that it's an incomplete release today, when does that subsequent deadline kick in? But I really want to see what the department is going to say by way of justification for all the redactions.
Professor, as you're speaking, we're scrolling through the pages here on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube, just showing black box after black box, redaction after redaction. As I mentioned a minute ago, some full pages are completely blacked out. Does this go to court? Even if we know that all the documents are released, will those justifications be challenged? They
may be challenged, but it would be by Congress. There's no recourse that I can see for any individual who is interested to go to court and demand a justification for the redactions. I think this would essentially be a political recourse for Congress to call members of the Department of Justice before them to testify. There are various political measures available to Congress, for example, withholding funds from the Department of Justice. They could, in theory, and I've heard this already suggest impeachment of various Department of Justice officials. But the Act doesn't provide a private cause of action for individuals who are interested in the material to go to court. At least I can't see a way for doing that. So it looks to me like it's more of a political consequence for the department if they don't comply.
Remember when Attorney General Pam Bondi said many months ago, toward the beginning of the year, that the so-called client list was on her desk. Now that we know that this is broken into hundreds of thousands of documents, it appears there is no client list. Was the Attorney General lying?
Well, the Attorney General created expectations a long time ago, and I think the act is the consequence of having created those expectations that were then not met. She created those expectations. President Trump did on the campaign trail, as did his FBI director, in saying that they would release all the files when they came into office, and then further going ahead and saying that there was a client list. So they created these expectations, and now the question is, will the release in any way meet them? And I expect it will not. But I do want to point out that one thing that is explicitly required in the act that was passed by Congress is that the Department of Justice provide a list of all government officials and politically exposed persons who are named or referenced in the released material. That is something that's going to have to be provided within 15 days after completion of the release of the material. And so, in effect, there will be at least a list of these sort of persons that may be of great public interest that the Department of Justice has to provide. That does not mean it is a client list at all.
It's interesting to read through this letter as Mr. Blanche makes it clear, as he writes, they did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties, and the review did not reveal credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals. Is no one getting in trouble here?
Well, the Department of Justice said in a letter that was released after Pam Bondi was in office, it was a very brief letter that was issued by the department when they first decided not to disclose any further Epstein files, that they did not find a basis for charging any additional individuals. So it sounds like Mr. Blanche's letter today is consistent with that prior brief letter memo by the Attorney General. So it appears the department is taking the position as of today that they don't have information to charge, sufficient information to criminally charge additional individuals. We will see if they change that position based on the ongoing review of the material. But of course, even if there are not criminal charges, there could be great sort of reputational consequence to people for being named in these materials.
It would not be a surprise if some careers were canceled this weekend. Jessica Roth, it's great to have you back. Former federal prosecutor, SDNY, professor at Cardozo School of Law. Thank you. Coming up, we'll continue our coverage of the release of the Epstein Files. They're coming out right now, and how Capitol Hill is watching this process unfold. When we talk with Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada, plus breaking news out of New York, Elise Stefanik has dropped her bid for governor. It's all next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. As we keep our eyes on the Department of Justice this evening, a live view on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube as the first batch of Jeffrey Epstein documents are released. DOJ, just a short time ago, dropped the first tranche of files, hundreds of thousands, with investigative records, flight logs, internal department communications, and many, many redactions. And this is not all. Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, made clear today in an interview on Fox News and separately in a letter to Congress that this is not done. They're, in fact, not going to technically meet the deadline at midnight tonight because there are hundreds of thousands more documents to come. Joining us now for more, Bloomberg senior investigative reporter Jason Leopold, who's had a chance to start digging through the documents. And Jason, I suspect this is going to take the better part of the weekend, if not the next several weeks. What's your first reaction to what you're seeing?
Indeed. So my first reaction is, okay, they met part of the deadline and did release some records. I'm going through them now. As you noted, there are thousands of pages. I do want to point out that some of the material has been previously released. So they kind of mixed up everything that they've previously released with this. Now, they are categorized as different sort of document types. There are images. So that appears to be what is new here. There's thousands and thousands of images. Some of those images are disturbing, even with the redactions, because it is labeled child sexual abuse material. There are records from grand jury proceedings in which, as I'm sure you're aware, as our viewers are aware, judges have had agreed in recent weeks to unseal these records. So it's certainly going to take some time going through everything. There's lots of records from that Palm Beach police investigation back in 2006. And it appears some of that has been released. Maybe there's some, new material there. What I haven't seen that I feel is very important is records from the FBI, and those will hopefully come in the in the days and weeks ahead. And those are interview summaries. So the FBI, when they're conducting interviews with witnesses, they will, or people that are under suspicion, they'll interview them and they'll memorialize that in these interview summaries. They're called 302 reports. So I haven't really seen that yet, but there are some interesting little tidbits that I'm coming across, certainly, in the images that show various officials. I mean, I have to say there are lots of pictures with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton's in this.
Saw that.
Seems to be a trip.
Let me ask you, Jason, you're a FOIA expert. You know how to pull sensitive, if not previously classified documents out of some of the darkest corners in Washington. How long is it going to take for them to release all of these?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. If I were to, have filed a FOIA request, and if they were to release this in response to a FOIA request, it would be many, many years. I think that we're going to see this release for many months to come. I don't think that they're going to even get close to releasing everything that quickly.
Wow. Okay, there you hear it. Many months to come. From Bloomberg senior investigative reporter Jason Leopold. Good luck with your work this weekend, Jason. Stay in touch with us on what you're finding, and we'll check back in with you later this hour as we continue to monitor developments coming out of the Justice Department release of these Epstein files. We do want to bring you some breaking news as well from this afternoon. Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik announcing today, amid all of this other news, she's dropping out of the race for New York governor. Stefanik making the announcement on social media, writing in part, "While spending precious time with my family this Christmas season, I've made the decision to suspend my campaign for governor and will not seek re-election to Congress." The announcement coming after Stefanik was publicly feuding with House Speaker Mike Johnson over a provision related to FBI probes of political candidates. That was just the most recent knock. And here to help break it down for us, Bloomberg's Megan Scully, who leads our Capitol Influence team. I'm assuming you're surprised by this.
Yes.
Wouldn't she have won this race? Or would this have been just too much of an expenditure?
She certainly was the odds-on favorite for the primary, the Republican primary for the state. And she had edged out Mike Lawler, a frequent guest on your show, who certainly had his eyes on the governor's office. And he ultimately decided not to run and to seek re-election to Congress instead. What's interesting, of course, Stefanik started the year in Trump's cabinet and then, was never confirmed, and it was a whole to-do. And then she went back to the House, where she was no longer a member of the leadership team and was just among the rank and file, and has really been sparring a bit with House leaders in recent days. So it has been certainly a wild and an odd trajectory for somebody who was once considered really a rising star within the party.
It sounds like she was crossed maybe one too many times by this administration and the Republican leadership in the House. She could do a lot of things right now. Do we have any sense of what might be next for her?
We don't. She, as she mentioned, spending time with her family in the coming days, and it sounds as though she will serve out her term. She said she wasn't running for re-election, but she still has a year on this term. Her background, of course, prior to becoming a MAGA darling in recent years, was in national security. On those matters, she served in the Bush White House on the National Security Council. So she could certainly do something in that regard, but I wouldn't necessarily rule out another run. Remember, Chuck Schumer is up for re-election in 2 years.
Some have thought that he might retire instead of run for, the president just posted on Truth Social as we're talking here, Megan. Elise Stefanik, a fantastic person and congresswoman from New York State, has just announced she won't be running for governor. He says Elise is a tremendous talent. Regardless of what she does, she will have great success, and I am with her all the way. Guess we prepare the Senate run?
Maybe. I wouldn't rule anything out.
She could also go somewhere and make a lot of money, correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And whether it's national security or it's fundraising within Republican politics. She and Trump remain close, it seems. There has not been a public falling out like he's had with Marjorie Taylor Greene and other Republicans.
Right. Well, I guess she's still got the boss on her side. Megan, thank you. Another development in the world of politics today. Megan Scully in Washington as we continue to monitor the Justice Department's release of the Epstein Files. With new perspective now from Capitol Hill, joining us Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada, a member of both the House Transportation Committee and House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congresswoman, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. The Trump administration says it will not have a complete release in time to meet the deadline at midnight. And based on our experience so far here, these files are not searchable. Did the administration break the law? What do you make of this partial disclosure?
Well, they break the law so often it doesn't seem to make much difference anymore. I think they released some things to show that they were trying to work in good faith, even though nobody's surprised that they haven't come out with all the records. And notice the timing right before everybody leaves for the holidays. We're not in session now. And also they're partially released. So who knows how many are left and what's in what's left and what's behind all the redactions. So, yes, it's a good step, but there's a lot more to learn from these records.
Well, that's for sure. And I realize we've got hundreds of thousands of documents and there'll be a lot of news likely emerging over the course of the weekend. There has been some concern about political motivation on the part of the Department of Justice, however. President Trump has instructed the Attorney General to investigate, for instance, Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, other Democratic names that he thinks should be taking the blame for what he calls the Epstein hoax. We're looking at massive redactions here, Congresswoman. Some entire pages are blacked out. Do you need to see justification from DOJ and what went into these redactions?
Well, we certainly should know what determined which ones they wanted to strike, because otherwise you just suspect that they're trying to cover something up. You black something out, that means you're hiding something. And so, of course, that's what people suspect. Now, whether we'll ever get that information or not remains to be seen. I doubt it. I doubt it seriously. And the fact that he's calling it a Democratic hoax, everything to him is a hoax. Affordability is a hoax. Health care is a hoax. Now, this is a hoax. And you see which pictures come out first, those of Democrats. And he's made no bones about the fact that retribution is kind of his North Star when it comes to making policy. Who can he go after who he thinks has wronged him in some way?
Well, it's interesting to talk to a member of Congress as these files are rolled out. We're scrolling through them right on the screen as you and I are talking, Congresswoman. Do you have staff? I'm just curious how your office is handling this or other members. Do you have staff going through this or are you receiving the news through the media like everybody else?
Well, I first received it through you all, but we do have staff assigned to this. I don't serve on the oversight committee, so I'm not directly involved in it like the committee members are. But certainly my constituents are interested in what it is. They want to be sure that justice is done. And, of course, everybody wants to know what is in the scandalous reports, what's going to happen to the girlfriend in prison. Will she really get out? Is she getting special treatment? All those kind of sordid details just add to the drama.
Well, of course, we wouldn't be having this conversation, Congresswoman, if it were not for a discharge petition, which appears to be the only way anything gets to the floor these days. Mike Johnson did not want this released. He wanted it to go through, as you just mentioned, the Oversight Committee. Will he regret that decision?
Well, certainly he's gotten a lot of pressure and a lot of pushback, not just from Democrats, but some Republicans, too, are saying, my constituents are demanding to know what's in there. We need to get it out. We need to put it behind us and move forward on something like health care. But you are right, whether it's shutting down government, whether it's calling a recess so you don't have to have a hearing, whether it's discharge petitions where you force a bill to come to the floor, or just how many censors we've had recently. That seems to be about all that gets done.
Congresswoman, you serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I have to change the subject to some breaking news right now. The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has just gone on social media to announce that U.S. forces have commenced strikes in Syria. They're calling it Operation Hawkeye Strike to eliminate ISIS fighters, infrastructure, and weapons sites, he writes, in direct response to the attack on U.S. forces that occurred December 13th in Palmyra, Syria. He says it's not the beginning of the war, a declaration of vengeance. Were you briefed on this before the strikes?
No, interestingly enough, we had a briefing from Hegseth and Marco Rubio and a couple of generals just last week, but that was all focused on Venezuela. That was just kind of a mouthful of acronyms and didn't really tell us anything about that situation. We certainly haven't heard about this one now in Syria, other than the fact that the president said some bad people are really going to be hurt and we're really going to respond in a really tough way. Well, I guess this Operation Vengeance is that response.
Wow. Well, the Secretary writes today, we hunted and we killed our enemies, lots of them, and we will continue. Is this the tail wagging the dog? Is that what we're going to hear over the weekend?
Well, it certainly adds to the confusion, and that's what this administration is all about. You light fires all over the place so nobody can keep up with what's going on or have any real sense of what the plan is. We've now left health care behind. We're leaving Venezuela behind. We're moving into Syria. We've got a new national defense strategy that insults Europe. What is going on? There's no rhyme or reason to it. It's not policy. It's just kind of ad hoc response. And this president, who so wants the Nobel Peace Prize, is lighting fires everywhere. And if we're not careful, we're going to be sending more troops on the ground, whether it's in Central America or East Asia or Central Asia.
Well, we saw some War Powers votes this week. I don't know if that's something that you think needs to be considered for Syria or through the region, Congresswoman. Is that the next step?
Well, you've got to watch all of these points of aggression, whether they're acts of war or not. The War Powers Act is a provision that's been there since right after Vietnam that requires the president to come to Congress to tell us what's going on. And we have certain provisions that we can use to stop any kind of action where we take the initiative, not in defense. Whether this rises to that level or not, I don't know, but we certainly need to know what's going on, and the public deserves to know what's going on. If you're going to send our troops somewhere, we ought to be a part of that decision-making process. I voted for those provisions to strengthen the War Powers Act, but of course the Republicans voted them down.
Representing the heart of Las Vegas, Henderson, in the 1st District of Nevada, Democratic Congresswoman Dina Titus. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us, as always. We're continuing to monitor the developments coming from the Justice Department and the release of the Epstein Files, but we do want to bring you some news from this afternoon after the president announced the administration has signed deals with 9 more pharmaceutical companies, the latest in a series of pacts designed to lower drug prices in exchange, in this case, for a 3-year reprieve from tariffs. Here he was speaking to the media early today.
I'm thrilled to be joined by the leaders of 9 of the world's largest pharmaceutical manufacturers, all very big names, celebrities in their own right, agreed to offer many of their flagship drugs, really all of their flagship drugs, at heavily discounted, most favored nations prices. In other words, whatever the drug sells for over the world, in the world, whatever the lowest number is, if it's Germany, if it's in UK, anywhere, we will match that price.
Flanked by pharma CEOs at the White House, the announcement impacted pharma stocks in a good way. Today, shares of Amgen, AbbVie, Bristol Myers, and Merck among those ending the week higher. As we turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Christine Aquino, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Christine?
Joe, we are seeing the immediate impact, of course, of those deals that the president announced with these drug makers. As you mentioned, shares of Merck, shares of Bristol Myers Squibb, among those really leading those gains. And so the president mentioned there are 3 key pledges that he's really targeting, right? One is, of course, lowering Medicaid prices, especially for elderly people and disabled people. He also wants discounted direct sales to consumers, and of course, prices that launch in the U.S. at the same level as what they are abroad, right? That's a big part of his affordability push. We do have 3 drug makers who have yet to announce deals. That is AbbVie, J&J among them. So, we'll see if that is in the running. We do see that J&J shares down 0.9% at the moment. AbbVie, though, up more than 1.8%. So perhaps the expectation is that it might be next in terms of announcing similar deals with the Trump administration. Of course, drug prices, health companies, pharmaceuticals having a good day today. Who's not having a good day? It's insurers, Joe, because we also heard from the president indicating that insurers are next in his target line of sight in terms of targeting lower costs. The president saying today that insurers are making too much money and need to make, quote, a lot less. And so investors in those shares definitely making a lot less money today. We have shares of insurers, including United Health, down across the board. United Health, of course, already having such a challenging year. It's down 35% this year, and those declines of 0.2% today, adding to those year-to-date losses. Now, let's take a look more broadly at the stock market, because it has been a good day today. It's green across the screen when it comes to major U.S. indexes. We have, of course, the NASDAQ leading those gains, 1.3% today. So tech very much back in the driver's seat, Joe, in terms of driving the year-end rally. Perhaps we might get a Santa rally after all before the end of the year. Treasuries also doing not too shabbily this week. Yields were higher across the board. And, we did see those losses today, but overall, a good week for them as well. Bitcoin also having a good day today after 2 days of losses. Still struggling to get above that 90,000 level, though. We'll see if it manages to do that at the end of the year. And of course, Oracle very much back in the news today. Wild swings this week. We did hear some good news today saying that Michigan regulators have approved a utility to supply power to a data center that they have in the works with OpenAI, Joe.
Really appreciate it, Christina. Deep dive on the markets with Bloomberg's Christina Aquino, and I hope you have a great weekend. We turn back to the breaking story of the release of the Epstein Files. This is the day, and the documents, including call logs, emails, court docs, Freedom of Information Act requests, with many, many redactions, are being released as we speak. Included are images as well, thousands of photographs, as Jason Leopold was just describing. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV, look at this. We're showing you some of them on the air right now. Jeffrey Epstein with Ghislaine Maxwell, with several women whose faces have been blurred, and many, many more. Joining us now with his reaction to this release this evening, Nick Akerman, the former Watergate prosecutor and founder of the law offices of Nick Akerman. It's great to have you back, sir. Here we are. It's not going to be a complete release, from what we understand from Todd Blanche, who said hundreds of thousands of documents will be released this evening, and it will be some time before they are all out there. We actually have been hearing some suggest it could be months. Do you have a sense of the scale and how we will ever know if they've all been released?
Well, first of all, I have no idea what the scale is. We know that there's a lot of material. We know that the Justice Department had the FBI go through all of these documents earlier this year to determine whether Donald Trump's name was in these documents. And that was a massive effort. Apparently, it did produce a number of documents that his name is mentioned in, which caused him to suddenly decide not to produce all of these records and take a different stance altogether, which caused Congress to finally come up with the bill that has forced these documents to be produced. The question, of course, is, are these being over-redacted? Are they taking advantage of redactions to completely cover up what is in these files? Well,
if
you look at these...
How do we know? We're looking at them right now, Nick. As you're talking, we're scrolling through the page on the screen. How will we ever know what's behind them?
The only way we're ever going to know is for somebody to actually challenge these in court, just like you would do with the Freedom of Information Act suit, and have a judge look at the originals, look at the redactions, and determine whether or not the redactions are legitimate. And that's going to take a lot of time. But I think that's...
Well, of course, many of these redactions may be for good, right, Nick? I mean, Todd Blanche writes in his letter to Congress, this process resulted in over 1,200 names being identified as victims, or their relatives. And the department has redacted reference to such names. In addition to redacting the names of these victims, the department has also redacted and is not producing any materials that could result in their identification. Did the DOJ protect the victims from what you've seen in this case? Because there was a big conversation about this method of release risking them going public.
Well, sure. And obviously, they can go through and they can redact those names. That's one of the exceptions under the act that was passed by Congress. But if you look at what they've done, I mean, it just seems like everything is blacked out. It's not like they've taken individual names, first names, last names, blackened them out. It looks like they're going through and redacting everything. And obviously, it's a bit too early to render a final decision on this. But you got to keep in mind the person in charge of this, Todd Blanche, is Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer. He's the same person that went down to Florida to get a statement from Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the chief co-conspirator with Jeffrey Epstein. And afterwards, she got bumped up to a upgrade in the federal prison system. So we don't really know and have kind of the trust that should be there if a third party was doing this and somebody who was neutral and could be trusted by the American people to actually go through this and do it in a proper fashion.
Todd Blanche writes in his letter to Congress, this is kind of an executive summary of what's in these files. Mr. Akerman, the review did not reveal credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals, nor did it uncover evidence that it could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties. Is the DOJ leading the witness?
Yeah, absolutely leading the witness. I mean, the whole idea is to get the facts out there so that the public can judge for themselves. It's not Todd Blanche who should be telling us what the conclusions are. That was the whole purpose in getting out that Epstein file so that the public can determine for themselves whether there's anything there based on the facts. What I'm concerned about is they're going to be hiding the ball and continuing the cover-up that's been going on straight through with this entire matter with the Epstein files.
Somebody made the point earlier that eventually even the tapes, the Nixon Watergate tapes, came out. Nick Akerman, as somebody who was involved in Watergate, do you see a day when all of these files are made public?
Well, don't forget, in Watergate, there was that 18-minute gap that was destroyed, a very significant piece of evidence. So the question, of course, is how many 18-minute gaps do we have in these releases? Has any of this stuff been destroyed? Obviously, the Department of Justice knows exactly what documents name Donald Trump and what documents might be in some way damaging to him. Are they covering those up? Are they going to release them? Or are they going to wind up like the 18-minute gap?
Wow. Nick Akerman, former Watergate prosecutor, founder of the law offices of Nick Akerman. It's great to see you. Thank you so much for the insights, as always. Maybe it's an 18-page gap at this point. Coming up, we'll continue our coverage of the Epstein file release, talk about it with our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Back with us, Bloomberg senior investigative reporter Jason Leopold, as we pour through hundreds of thousands of documents, Jeffrey Epstein documents released earlier today by the Department of Justice. Good to have you with us again here, Jason. I know that you've had a couple of hours only to start peeling through all of the documents and the many photographs. As you pointed out, you were the first to say that there are, in fact, thousands of images here. When you consider those along with the documents and the many redactions that we're looking at, is it possible to weave any kind of narrative out of this, or is this just a bunch of disparate information so far?
Yeah, that's a good question. I want to be careful about that, because here's the thing, is that these photographs, there's no context with it. So it's clear that some of these photographs, if many of these photographs were collected as part of the Justice Department's investigation, they were included in trials and in preparation for prosecution. but there's no context. So one can draw conclusions just from seeing individuals there. As far as I mentioned Clinton earlier, right? I mean, there are photographs of Bill Clinton. We knew that Bill Clinton had met Epstein. They've been photographed many times. Those photographs have been released. So I kind of want to pause on that and do some more sort of research around what do these photographs mean. I don't think that there is at this point any kind of real narrative to draw from this, other than the fact that, again, Epstein moved in many circles, and there were many people, prominent people, high-profile individuals in his orbit. So they are certainly interesting, but how it factors into, again, the government's investigation into Epstein. And I want to also point out something from an important line from the Epstein Files Transparency Act, right? That's the bill, the legislation that Trump signed. So that piece of legislation specifically instructed the government to release records on individuals, including government officials, who were known to have some kind of connection to the criminal case around Jeffrey Epstein. It was very specific, so it's unclear if in fact the Justice Department, when they release this, if that's the guidelines that they were following, or if they just said, here's a bunch of photographs.
All right, Jason, thank you again for helping us out.
Thank you.
Bloomberg senior investigative reporter Jason Leopold. The Justice Department, in fact, had to release, according to that law that the president signed, all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in a searchable and downloadable format. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Washington Deputy Bureau Chief Laura Davison, who's been reviewing these documents. Those last couple of items are important here and worth noting, Laura. A searchable format is not what we have today.
That is not. It is just going through document by document, as well as this is just a first tranche. The Justice Department said there will be more coming, hundreds of thousands of documents, in fact, coming over the next several weeks. This is almost certainly going to get Democrats up in arms, pushing back both on, the Justice Department not revealing all the information they have, not making it easy for people to go through and find. And it's probably also, they're going to be asking questions, at least, no surprise, that at least from what's been unearthed so far, that the most embarrassing photos in here are those of Bill Clinton being shown in a pool or a hot tub. Photos of Trump have not come to the surface yet so far. I'll note there's a lot of documents people are still going through, but Trump seems to, from this initial pass, be not as heavily included in this.
Look at these pages, Laura, full pages as we're showing on the screen. The entire page is blacked out. Unclear, as we just discussed with Nick Akerman, if we will ever know what is behind the redaction here. But Susie Wiles, the White House chief of staff, said in her now infamous interview with Vanity Fair that she read the files, that Donald Trump's name was in there, and there was nothing to implicate him with illegal behavior. President's going to be speaking about 4 hours from now in North Carolina. Does he declare full vindication tonight?
It's very possible he does. It's also, earlier today when he was at a White House event with some pharma executives, he declined to take questions from reporters, saying he didn't want to soil the announcement on drug prices with other questions, other unrelated things. So it's clear that he's not comfortable, at least earlier today, taking questions on this. He may, after this has come out, just seeing the initial headlines, he may decide he wants to declare victory and move on. But he's not really going to be able to move on because there's going to be drops and drops for days and days to come.
Or maybe weeks or months, as we're learning now. Laura, thank you. Bloomberg's Laura Davison. Be deeply curious to see if the president goes to the back of the jet tonight on the way to North Carolina. Joining us now with their reaction to all of this. What a day. This evening's political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributor and Democratic analyst Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, alongside Republican strategist Lester Munson, principal of the international practice at BGR Group. Jeannie, we've been talking about this for weeks and months. Here we are. White House, the DOJ, not going to be able to deliver all the files tonight. What should be the reaction by Democrats?
You know, the reaction by Democrats, we are already hearing. We heard from Adam Schiff. We heard from Schumer. At the very least, they were expecting a log of what has been combed through and why these redactions occurred. They didn't get that. As you mentioned, they didn't get the searchable files. They didn't even get all the files. So I think we're going to hear a lot of reaction from Democrats and from a lot of people. Joe, I mean, I'm going through these just like everybody else, and there are just pages and pages of black boxes on photos and on text. So it's quite a release. But I think one of the big questions I have is, apart from the information released, where in the world is Pam Bondi? And has she been replaced by Todd Blanche? Because all over today was Todd Blanche talking about this. Nothing from Pam Bondi on this. And of course, Todd Blanche telling all of us that they couldn't possibly release these files. But I don't know what that says about the future of Pam Bondi.
Lester Munson, what do you think about that? Jeannie makes a great point. Todd Blanche on cable news this morning, he's the one who sent this letter to Congress summarizing what was in these documents. What about the boss?
Well, it could be they thought she'd be asked about the Susie Wiles interview, and maybe best to kind of keep her in the background and let somebody else step forward on this thing.
Remember when she put out the binders and all this stuff? She's not had a real great track record with this.
Yeah, so that seems fair. But I do think Democrats need to be a little bit careful here. The Biden administration had access to these files for 4 years. Didn't really pop anything out that was super incriminating of anyone. So if I were in public office, I'd be calling for disclosure and transparency, and I tried to avoid any kind of name calling because it's a little unclear to me where all this is going to end up. For a lot of people, it could be a giant fizzle, or it could be there's just damage across the board.
You're typically one to tamp down the crazy when we talk about politics. What are the odds that this is a nothing burger tonight, and in fact, victims have been protected, and there are no big names or cancellations to emerge?
Well, I mean, we've already seen a lot of names come out and people doing clearly things they should not have done. And these photos of Bill Clinton do seem at least a little bit embarrassing. Why is a grown man in a hot tub at all, much less with anybody else? So I think a lot of that damage has been done. And I'm not trying to say the file shouldn't be released in full and get as much disclosure as possible. That should be done. But I think, it's possible we've seen most of the incriminating stuff so far. Because remember, these files have been in the possession of both parties at this point. So I think if someone found something really incriminating on the other party, they would have done something.
Well, it's interesting, Jeannie. I don't know what the president is going to say, if anything, this evening. He's flying to North Carolina for a speech on affordability following his speech this week from the White House, his address to the nation. We may well hear full vindication when he speaks. We also may hear about strikes against Syria that the Department of Defense just announced after we came to air. I'll ask you what I asked Congresswoman Titus. Is this the tail wagging the dog?
I hope not. We knew that these strikes were going to come, so I don't think we're that surprised. But I think that is a real concern because we wouldn't necessarily have these concerns except for how hard the Republicans in Congress and the White House have fought from releasing these files. And Lester is absolutely right. The Biden administration had these files as well, but what they weren't under was a law which forced compliance. And that is the problem here. And I would just go back to what Massey said earlier. He said if there's not 20 names that are known by the victims in those files, who are people we don't know yet, who were accused of these crimes, then the files haven't been fully released, which gets back to what Akerman was talking about. The fact that you've got Todd Blanche, the president's attorney, who has bent over backwards, as he should as the president's attorney, to protect him, but not in his role as deputy attorney general. And so he's in charge of this. That raises a whole host of questions. And to me, his letter to Congress sort of sounded like he was Bill Barr in the Mueller report. I'm going to tell you how to look at these files. That's not what anybody did. So I think he's raising more questions than answers. They should just release and comply fully.
All right, I need to ask you both about our other big breaker here and the decision by Elise Stefanik, the New York Congresswoman, to not run for governor. Say what you will about what motivated this decision. I'm wondering about what comes next, because on CNN just a short time ago was Congressman Mike Lawler, who was thinking about running, decided not to when he had the opportunity. and was asked if he's going to throw his hat back into the ring. Lawler, I'm going to take a little bit of time before I commit further as to what I may or may not do. Is he running?
He may run. He'd be a good candidate in a blue state. He's a moderate Republican. Yep. He's shown he can be with Trump on some key issues, good for blue collar New
the healthcare
Yorkers.
Thing the right way.
He's also shown some independence from Trump, and so he's that kind of hybrid moderate Republican who might do pretty well statewide. Stefanik, maybe she's too closely tied to Trump. She got some poll numbers three days ago that showed her losing to the governor Hochul by, I think, 18 points. So she may have thought that was a big hole to dig out of when it's going to be hard to run as a Trump Republican in an off year in 26 when the economy isn't doing well. And that's certainly what it looks like right now.
Jeannie, we've got less than a minute. Was Elise Stefanik simply crossed too many times by her own party, or was that meeting with Zoran Mamdani in the Oval Office the thing that made this untenable?
Yeah, the entire thing has been untenable for Elise Stefanik. I think what Lester mentioned, I think the poll numbers are a big issue. I think also the fact that the president refused to endorse her after everything from the UN to Mamdani, refused to endorse her over Blakeman, said they're both friends. He likes them both. And of course, he does like her. But that is not going to help her. And I will tell you, I think it's going to be hard for Lawler as well to run. Bruce Blakeman already endorsed by the New York GOP.
We're going to find out together, Jeannie.
Got it.
Jeannie Shanzano and Lester Munson, thank you for a great conversation. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.